Hello, everyone. This is John from RPGs and More. And in this episode, I wanted to talk about the concept of legacy in our role playing games. And this is something that I started thinking about many years ago when I first read the Riddle of Steel role playing game. One of the aspects of the Riddle of Steel that I thought was really cool was this idea that if your first character died in a campaign, then your next character would get some kind of bonus. Usually, you would get uh, better ability scores or maybe more skills or something like that for your next character, thus giving you some sort of, uh, I guess, a payback in the sense of like, hey, you lost your character, but here's a nice boost for your next character so you don't have to feel so bad, kind of idea. And I really liked that when I was younger and I was first getting into that game. That game and reading about ideas, and I thought that was really cool. And since then, I've encountered a similar idea in other systems. The most famous one being Pendragon. Now, I don't know exactly how all the rules in Pendragon work, but I know the concept of legacy is very much a part of the Pendragon game cycle, where you start out with a character in the time of Uther Pendragon, and then after that character has lived their life, then you can start playing that character's progeny. And your next character has certain benefits, uh, both either stat wise or equipment wise, based on what you did with your first character, and then so on and so forth. As you play that character, that second character, then they have children, and you play their children in as the campaign goes on, up until the time when finally, the end of the Arthurian cycle comes, and you probably don't play much beyond that because that's pretty much the scope of the game. And it just kind of gets me thinking because I know back when I first started playing older editions of D&D, one of the things that I encountered every once in a while, which I thought was standard practice at the time, but I since haven't seen a whole lot, especially in the OSR, was this idea of designating next of kin for your character. And the concept there being that your next of kin would be ostensibly your next character after that first character was killed in some fashion. And therefore, any equipment that was recovered or um, any gold or whatnot that you had in a bank would then be bequeathed to that next character to give them kind of a leg up as to help them catch up faster in the campaign. And I thought that was neat. And it made me wonder, why don't we see that more often in our games? Well, one reason why I think that we don't see that too often is uh, it's because there's a concentration on fairness. People want to feel like everyone has the same chances and opportunities, and so therefore sorry, I'm picking some thing off of my cat that was stuck on him for some reason. They think about wanting everyone to have a fair shake. I mean, you don't like the idea of two characters that are in the game having unequal chances, which, in my experience, is never the case anyway, because you have people with different levels of familiarity with a system, and they're able to make more out of what equipment they have. You've got people that, if you're playing one of those games that emphasizes builds, then someone with more experience with their builds is going to be able to build a better character than someone who's just starting out. And so, this concept of fairness, uh, I've not really found it in RPGs as much as we'd like to think it's there. It's really not been. But still, because of fairness, a lot of people will say, no, 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 every new character starts with the same opportunities as every other new character. So you can't inherit things from your previous character. There's also this whole idea where when people create backstories for their characters, there was a trend going for a while where you didn't want to give your character a family because you were concerned that anything you gave your DM, like a family or friends or connections, would then be used to hurt your character because the DM was looking for, plot points and things they could do to motivate your character in order to do things. And for one reason or another, at least in the groups that I played with, that was considered a no-no. People didn't like to feel like they were being motivated by stuff being threatened, and they wanted to choose to do the adventure for their own reasons and not feel pressure on their character. I'm not here to say whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying what I remember and why I think that might have had an effect on the idea of legacy. Because if you don't have family, if your character was an orphan, and has no friends, then there's no one for them to leave their gear to. There's also the thought that most characters tend to carry their lives on their backs. And this is even more prevalent now because in many role-playing game sessions, especially in D&D centered ones, there's a lot of pressure on DMs to provide a party with a bag of holding just as a matter of course. And that might even be, each character needs their own bag of holding. And that comes down to people not wanting to have to deal with weight and encumbrance and managing their backpacks. I don't entirely disagree with all of that. I think that it is a convenience. The only reason why I might disagree with it is because it promotes this concept of magic items being common enough that someone with enough money will be able to get one or have one commissioned by a wizard who is, looking to make some extra coin and whatnot. And um, it it became more and more popular the more we started having what I refer to as the Christmas tree characters, where the characters always had magic items on them, and they were typically items of the same type. So everyone had their favorite magic weapon, everyone had their favorite magic armor, everyone had magic rings, everyone had. And if you didn't have the full set, if you didn't have the full Christmas tree, then your DM was stingy. And it kind of just put all that weight on the DM and that blame on the DM, saying it's your fault that my character isn't reaching my full potential because you're not giving me enough stuff as treasure and loot. That was really prominent in Pathfinder when I was playing it. Part of that was because the Pathfinder system is built around this idea that at certain levels, characters will have certain gear. So if you didn't have that +1 weapon by X level, or the +3 weapon by X level, along with all the other, X level items that were expected to go along with it, then your character would be underpowered compared to the monsters that you would be expecting to face at X level. And so that kind of enforced this idea that you had to have a lot of magical items. But I'm digressing a little bit here. So reason why bags of holding became very prominent, partially due to that Christmas tree item, Christmas tree concept, and because of that, characters didn't use banks in the world. They would carry all of their treasure in their bag of holding, which meant that if the character was killed in the dungeon and their equipment wasn't recovered for whatever reason, or it was destroyed in the process, then there was nothing for another character to inherit because it all was in the bag of holding. Um, and you might get lucky, and the bag of holding was being held by a different character at the time, and so therefore they could still get their portion of the treasure. But most parties would simply just divvy up that treasure amongst themselves as the surviving members, and not even there was no question of should we get this to next of kin. And that's something that I find it interesting in how we handle things differently nowadays than we used to. And I'm not saying that it's a design thing. I'm not saying that it's a thing that is deliberate even. I think it's a subtle change in just how players play. I mean, if you have always played with this idea of leaving something to your next character, let me know, because I'd love to hear that it's a more common phenomenon than I've been seeing. Maybe I know for a fact that my own experiences are a very small section of our role playing community. So tell me about it. I'd love to hear about it. Truly, not this isn't even like content farming. This is me just saying like I'd really, as a person, I would like to know how widely spread this might be as an idea for your games, and or am I right in saying that it's not really been a factor? So the question then becomes, what is a way that we can incorporate legacy into our games? And I'm not really sure on this one, because there's two different types of legacy in my mind. We've been kind of addressing both so far. There's legacy for the character sheet, and there's legacy for the character's story. Um, so, legacy for the character's story is this idea that I am playing the child of my previous character, or the nephew, or the niece, or a distant relative, or just a good friend who, they happen to bequeath their worldly goods to. Um, and therefore providing a connection from one character to the next, even if those characters are wildly different in both heritage and training. And I think that especially if you're playing in a long campaign, the idea of having that sort of connection between multiple characters can sometimes help lighten the blow when a beloved character does die as a result of actions that they have taken in the game, or that one last failed saving throw, or if you're playing old school, you're finally getting in a situation where they just got reduced to 0 hit points unexpectedly. Those things happen, and that can sting, especially if you've been playing the character for a long time. You've grown attached. There's a lot of stories connected to that character. You're like, suddenly it's like their story's over, and that's it. But if we can connect their story to the new character that we're making in some sort of real and tangible way within the campaign world, then it's like their story isn't over. It's just now being told by someone else. And I think that I imagine that would feel better for some people. I think it would feel better for me. And it's something that I kind of want to start incorporating into more of my characters going forward when I start, when I'm playing games with friends and family, and just, even playing my solo games, because I have not been doing that in my solo games, and maybe I should. But then we go to the character sheet legacy. And this is kind of where I don't really want to put the equipment inheritance on the character sheet necessarily, because it is more of a story element. Because you make the character, and then when you meet up with the party, maybe you collect the inheritance, and then that changes how the character can function and things like that. That's how I would do it, especially if I was making a level 1 character. Um, and then that comes into the question of, when you make your new character, are you going to make it at level 1 and then they have to kind of level up and grow into the party? Maybe the party is level 7. Um, and they slowly become more powerful, and things like that, as they kind of grow up, and they probably level up faster because they're with the rest of the party, and they're naturally going to be gaining more experience. Um, that's one way to do that, is so they inherit some equipment and some monies from the previous character, and then they just level up faster. As long as they survive, then it's going to be gravy. It's going to be fine. But for the first little while, the other party members are going to feel like they have to carry the new character for a bit, and they're kind of right. Especially if they're deliberately just trying to continue in the exact campaign scenario that they were going on previously, which requires encounters that are balanced to the party's level. Um, I think it would be interesting, especially if you're running a West Marches style campaign, to still have some low level content available that the party can enjoy. Maybe the more powerful characters can, take the lower level character on a goblin hunt, and they get the comfort of being able to kind of like both be able to take care of any real problems that come up that might be beyond the lower level character, as well as being able to kind of flex their muscles a little bit and show off a little bit and realize, hey, I am level 7. This is nothing. Let me show you exactly why this is nothing for me. And then, kind of like I was running a game this past a few months ago for Memorial Day. And in that game, I had a level 4 fighter paired up with a group of 3 to 4 level 1 characters. The reasons for that is unimportant, but let's just say level 4 fighter, and that level 4 fighter, well, because it was a bunch of other level 1 characters, I was throwing them against level 1 character appropriate monsters. But the level 4 fighter had combat machine, and he was able to just start whacking, 4 attacks per round against which pretty much every monster that I was throwing out, he was being a combat machine on. And that was kind of cool because you got to see him as a player really dig uh, the feel of like, I am like, yes, I am the bulwark that is keeping this group together, but boy, do I get to be the coolest guy at the table, or the coolest adventurer in this encounter in these caves, because I'm just whacking things out right and left, bam, 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 and that was kind of cool. And I think that's where those moments can allow your party to shine, when it's not like, when you're not pushing a story as much, and you're allowing them to naturally kind of dial the difficulty back in order to sort of handle something else in the world that might not have been on their radar otherwise. That I'm a big fan of the West Marches style, the actual West Marches style of, the adventure happens regardless, and whoever shows up for that day are the ones who play. Um, I have found over the years that is far superior to trying to organize a game day with all the players and no one has a schedule that actually works. The joke, and it's not a joke, but the comment being that the real final boss of D&D is scheduling. And so to me, playing a West Marches style game, while it has its limitations, does effectively eliminate scheduling as a problem, unless you're the DM, because if the DM has schedule issues, then no one's playing. But that's kind of true regardless. All right. So, character sheet bonuses or character sheet legacy. That's where kind of like the Riddle of Steel concept comes in, where your next character kind of gets extra ability points to be able to spend on their abilities and whatnot. I'm not sure on this one anymore. I'm a little less like I like it, especially within the same campaign, because it allows a player to feel like, well, yes, I lost my character, but look at this cool thing I can now do that I couldn't do before, which I think is kind of neat. And maybe it's something that we need, because maybe that would help, or that would mitigate some of the social pressure that I see being put on game masters on a regular basis of, you got to challenge my character, but don't you dare kill my character, because I spent so many hours making this character and I do not want this character to die. So you'd better not. It's kind of like the attitude that I see sometimes. People get so focused on, I don't want my character to die because I'm emotionally invested in this character, and so you can't do that. You can't let my character be in danger. And honestly, if characters aren't in danger, then what's the point? All right. We're playing the game. We're sending our characters into dangerous situations because it's exciting. But the moment that our characters are not in danger, the moment that we know that the DM is just going to save our characters, then the game it means a lot less. And yeah, you can have this whole like, I spent hours crafting this perfect alternate personality for myself, this character that expresses this thing about me that I really want to be able to put out there. And I'm not against that. I think that that is a beautiful creative exploration of what role-playing games can do. But when people become so attached to their characters that even the thought of losing that character or of watching someone else lose their character produces anxiety at the table, I am a little concerned. And this is not a note on specific people, because I've seen it in multiple scenarios with multiple groups. So, you know, it's fascinating to me that this is where we are. And I think that's one of the reasons why in 5th edition it's so hard to kill a character. And before you come at me and say, well, I've had my DM kills characters all the time in 5th edition, or like, I'm a DM and I kill characters all the time. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible to do. I'm saying you have to try. You have to be actively engaging in the systems that kill characters. Unless you're playing like first level games, in which case, yeah, I know that can happen easy. But even then, you still have all the death saving throws and a bunch of other stuff involved in that can help your characters come back. I'm comparing that to old school Renaissance games where when you reach 0 hit points, there's no saving throw. You're just dead. That's what I'm comparing that to. So when you want to, so just keep that in mind. That's what I compare that to. All right. So I think that if we were to have some kind of mechanical benefit, then some players might feel a little bit more comfortable with this idea that, you know what, I lost my character. Them's the breaks. At least I went out in a blaze of glory, hopefully, or left a fun story for the group, and I can make a new character, and now I've got an extra thing that I can do. Maybe you can maybe you actually, if you're playing like a point by system, maybe I get an extra X number of points to make my next character with, and the X is dependent upon what level my previous character was when they passed. Um, and I disconnect that from this idea of my next character is going to be the party level, except one lower. So if everyone's playing level 7 characters, my next character will be a level 6 character. Because a lot of people will do that. They're just trying to bring the character up to speed as quickly as possible to avoid those awkward moments of maybe we should, not adventure where we are right now and kind of go back to the starting area of the campaign, or starting area, quote unquote, using video game terms, but trying to level somebody up as quickly as possible. And instead they're just a level below us, so they can hang with the challenges that we're putting out right now, or we're facing right now. Maybe that's I don't connect that with this whole concept of legacy, because it is a neat practice. It does work, especially if you're just not interested in the other way of doing things. So I'm not knocking it. But it's also not connected in any way, shape, or form to your previous character. You're just making a whole new character from a whole cloth, but you get to do so at level 6. I say a lot, don't I? It bugs me. Side note. If we add a legacy element to that, then on top of starting at 6th level, they would then have increased opportunity for ability scores, or they would have, maybe they have access to some equipment that their previous character had, the stuff that didn't get destroyed with them. Okay, cool. Maybe they have access to some spells that are connected to the other character's backstory in some way, shape, or form. Whatever you want to do with your group is how you would do it. I'm not trying to tell you exactly how you should do it. These are just some ideas for me about how we can make legacy work in any game system. Whether it's GURPS or Retro Clone, or heck, you probably use it with Daggerheart at some point if you wanted to. I'm still learning that system. I don't know enough to talk about it, but it is on my shelf. Ta-da! But it's a tough one. Part of why legacy is tough is because, in a very real sense, it reminds us of our own legacy. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot in the past year, because I lost my father this past August. And that has changed how I view a lot of things. That's not something I really, I don't want to talk a lot about that. But thinking about it has really kind of forced me to ask myself that question of, what is my legacy? What is the thing that I will leave behind? And it's a tough one, because it forces you to look at your life in a very critical way. What have you done? What will you pass on? And who will you pass it to? And if I'm having a hard time dealing with it in the real world because of real world reasons, I can imagine that some people, especially young people, might have a harder time wanting to tackle that in their fictional world. Now, on the one hand, I would argue that tackling it in the fictional world first of our stories and our games is probably easier than having your first experience of that being tackling it in the real world because of things that life is thrown at you. And these are inevitable things. These are not things we can avoid. So there is something to be said for that. But maybe it's something that we should think about both as game players, but also as game masters, and maybe even as game creators. Like, how can I incorporate legacy into my games? How can I make this concept of generational gaming work? Pendragon has done it. They've shown the way, and it's fascinating. It's so tied to the Arthurian setting that it's really a part of it, and it makes perfect sense for that. But how would you take that and incorporate that into, say, the Forgotten Realms, or into Eberron, or into Exandria, or whatever game setting you're using, your home setting? Obviously, if you're like me, you're making your own home setting, and it's a lot of fun, and you love it. So how can we incorporate that? How can we make legacy matter? And should we make legacy matter? That's a hard question. I still am not convinced 100% that games should have legacy, or at least not all of them anyway. Not all games should have legacy anyway, because not all games need every mechanic. But the idea that, should this be a more widely used concept in our games? I don't know. I'm not sure. But I've been thinking about it, and I had enough thoughts that I thought it was worth sharing, as I kind of have been looking at my own gaming experience and the differences between how I used to play, with this idea of, once I get a pile of gold, I need to make sure that I designate who, what happens to it after I pass, and is there a bank at the keep, or in the town, that I can store my goods with, so that some of my goods are safe in case something happens to me, like a rust monster attack, and I need to re-equip myself, or someone else needs to be equipped from what's left of my money. And I think that's something that we don't really see. Like I said, because most adventurers put all their funds into their bag of holding. So it's like they're carrying their bank with them. And I kind of touched on this, I think, in a previous video when I was talking about transportation and logistics. But banking is certainly something that it did exist in the medieval era. It is historically accurate. Actually, most of the first banks, if memory serves, were run by people like the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, where I think it was the Knights Templar actually supposedly invented the paper check, because a nobleman could deposit treasure in France, and they would receive a slip of paper. And then, as they were traveling to the Holy Land, they could turn in that paper to take out some treasure at a local Templar chapter, so they had money to spend where they were. But as long as they kept that paper, and it would be updated, so and such was used here and there and whatnot. They would, as long as they kept that paper on them, then they would still have access to their funds when they got to the Holy Land, and then also on the trip back home. Excuse me. And so it's not impossible for your fantasy world to have a bank. You just have to have a world that is connected enough, interconnected enough with roads and countries and some kind of organization that's willing to oversee banking and willing to guarantee it. And that would give, and even if it's just a local bank, let's say there's no branches necessarily, it's just one of the local lords happens to run a banking service out of their, they have a proxy that works in the village next to the castle, or the town or the city next to their castle, and that proxy runs the banking business for them, and it's guaranteed by the local noble's treasury. So, maybe it's a small form thing, but it does offer the option for taking out loans or just for storing treasure in a vault. That's an interesting. I think it's interesting, and it's not something I've seen a lot in games. Some people provide that as part of their campaign settings, but um, not a lot of people do for various reasons. And I don't know. It's all connected to legacy in my head, at least right now. Maybe that's just the headspace that I'm in. I do hope that this has been an interesting, thought-provoking talk, and maybe you'll think about incorporating legacy into your own games in the future. And maybe you'll say, you know what, you're right. That's not in my game. And I'm cool with that. And you know what? More power to you. Ah, the dipper! He's scratching the chair. He's not supposed to scratch the chair. There we go. All right. Only scratching the wooden leg. He can scratch the wooden leg. That is whatever. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope this didn't bring anyone down too much. It is a little more serious of a topic than most of the other topics that I talk about. So I do apologize for that. I won't blame you if you don't want to listen to it. I don't intend on talking about this kind of more serious stuff all too often, but every once in a while it comes up. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day, and peace be with you. Bye bye.